Our next guest is Marianne Williamson. You may recognize her from her recent run for the Democratic nomination, but what you might not know is she has been a spiritual leader, influencer in progressive circles, and a revolutionary thinker for decades. She's here with us now to discuss how we can heal from the COVID-19 crisis as a society on all levels: physically, emotionally, politically, economically, and spiritually. Marianne, thanks for joining us today. I really appreciate you coming on.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me. Thank you so much.
There are so many parallels between what's happened with the AIDS epidemic and what is happening now. Could you talk about that? I know you were instrumental in treating people in a humane way when that outbreak was happening. I'd love to get your input based on that understanding.
The similarities and parallels have to do with rampant fear and grief and the recognition that only our being there for one another would get us through this. What is dissimilar is that there was no rampant feeling, nor should there have been, that this was some huge rebalancing that would change the world forever. That's unique to this situation. So even though emotionally and psychologically it's very similar, you know, with AIDS, it was a very difficult disease to get. Although before there was medicine, if you got it, your chances of survival were very, very low. This is the exact opposite. There's all this panic because it's so easy to get in certain situations, although it is survivable in many, many cases. So there's some dissimilarities there about who is afraid for their own life. There wasn't with the AIDS crisis a universal sense that everyone was vulnerable to the physicality of the disease, although almost everybody was vulnerable in certain communities and that we knew someone or had a relative, etc. But what, as I said, what makes this different is not that we are being forced to feel deeply, think deeply, but that we are being forced, if we are conscious, to reimagine what we want this country and this world to be on the other side of this.
Mm, I think people are fearful that in the moment of crisis, there's also opportunity for further authoritarianism to take hold. What are your thoughts on the possibility of a positive outcome?
Well, the fear within the context of life as we know it is legitimate. We're standing at a crossroads, and this could go either way.
Mhm.
This can either be the crucible out of which there arises a far more just society because enough people understand that the systemic injustices, economically, socially, and politically, are what left us so vulnerable. And those systemic injustices are playing out even now with the way the situation is being handled, even now, the bailout, etc.
Mm,
But the other opportunity, of course, will be for the system as it is, which left us this vulnerable, to use this as an opportunity for even more of an authoritarian path in the future.
yeah.
It's our choice, and that's exactly what I meant by it's time for us to be doing a lot of thinking. Because if we do want to take the route towards greater enlightenment, greater democracy, course correction, systemic justice, really using this as the crisis which makes us realign with the angels of our better nature, then we better get really busy. And a lot of the busyness right now is an intellectual busyness of all of us to be very clear what's happened, what's happening, and what we're going to have to do the minute we're able to get out of our houses again.
Yeah. What do you think we could do while we're in our houses? And this is a really a two-pronged question. There are people who are dealing with mental health challenges, having been locked in their homes and surrounded by the fear of the news media. And then there's all the political work we need to do as we see our vulnerable communities, um, on the front lines, our workers, our nurses, our disabled individuals, the people who care for the disabled individuals, the EMS staff. I know these are two big questions, and I leave it to you to answer in the way that you think. What can we be doing? Is it a separate question? What we can be doing politically, and we can be doing for our own mental health?
Well, first of all, politically, I think all of us, well, not even just politically, personally, on the level of the heroes who are taking care of this. So I three words politically. I think we need to be very aware of the inadequacy of the response of the government so far. We need to be aware. This is a great awakening for the American people. It is catalyzing this crisis is catalyzing an awakening among many people who, for whatever reason, were not sure before, but they sure as hell are sure now that this government functions in a way where they don't care about you.
Mhm.
And not only is it that once this virus came, the system was not set up to care or even willing to care about the majority of its citizens, but it wasn't before.
Mm.
So politically, this is an opportunity for a lot of people to think through, to open their eyes, to stop being so chronically disengaged politically, to do some thinking, etc. The second has to do with our willingness to not our willingness, but the importance of our witnessing the incredible heroism, not only of our doctors and our nurses and our medical personnel. A friend of mine who works at a hospital was telling me, a big hospital in Miami, was telling me yesterday that people just drive by and leave stacks of pizzas and uh, meals from restaurants, people, young people who are, people who are sewing masks, people who are creating equipment out of 3D printers. So it's also showing the best of who we are. But the point is for us to realize that the collaboration that we're experiencing in many cases, which is the antidote, my concern, as I'm sure yours is as well, is that the tsunami of hysteria and panic that might be coming at us if, in fact, the government doesn't respond more quickly. This $1,200 one-time payment is completely inadequate, and the panic that people are already beginning to fear.
Mhm.
So we must step up, put our feet to the metal on this issue of our collaboration with each other and demonstrating another way. And in addition to that, committing to ourselves collectively and individually that on the other side of that, we're not going to go back to the isolated, self-centered people we were before. That we know that this way of being that we're being called to now has to be the new dominant way of being, not only culturally, but politically. Now, the
Uh,
last category you asked about was mental health. And I do not ascribe to the current and now dominant mythos around mental health. Our society is insane. We keep talking about how people have mental health issues. People have mental health issues because the society itself is so unhealthy.
mhm.
Pathologizing it as individual problems only opens the way for all manner of opportunity for people to build multi-billion-dollar industries based on that. And it also is a perfect setup for weakening people's self-perception, particularly among women. So it's sometimes being upset is a sign of mental health.
Right?
Sometimes the fact that you were so upset is, and the fact that we were not upset before means that was what was unhealthy, but people would get so upset about the recognition, the radar going out, something is so wrong here, meant people were picking up that they knew something was wrong, and then they were told, you have a mental health issue. So can we stop with that? Listen, you think we're traumatized? Well, the people who were walking across the bridge at Selma, they were traumatized too. We have got to stop with this coddling, with this preciousness. This is a tough time, okay? It was tough for people in World War II. It was tough for the abolitionists and for the slaves, God knows. It was tough for the civil rights people. It was tough for the suffragettes. No, this is not a time for women to be little girls or for men to be little boys. And this whole mental health issue conversation is used to weaken us too often when it should be something that strengthens us and actually makes us know uh, that when you have a situation that's depressing, of course we're depressed. You have a situation this heartbreaking, of course we're heartbroken. You have a situation this horrifying, of course we're horrified. That doesn't mean we have a mental health problem. It means we're mentally healthy.
Mm. Isn't one of the, at the end of the 12 steps, the idea is to go out and to maintain and preserve your own sort of sense of self, the new self that you found through doing that spiritual work by doing service for others. And I feel a little bit like this is, I just don't feel like I'm doing enough. I'm doing the show, but I want to go get groceries for the nurse next door, and I want to take the, I feel like there's, we did an interview earlier today with a woman who is the head of a union for people who provide service with people with disabilities, and her group is going into these homes without protective gear. They could possibly bring the disease in, they could be bringing it home to their families. It's basically a disaster. And so there's enough service to be going around, I think. And I always just encourage people to get involved. I mean, that's what act.tv does. The tagline is do more than watch, in terms of what we do here, is we really encourage people to get involved as much as they can. um, when you were running for office, you made a comment on the debate stage about the dark forces. I think it became the most Googleable or Googled thing. And I was very grateful for that, because the words, for me, the words greed or narcissism, they don't encompass exactly what is happening. It feels far bigger than, a few corporations' greed, a few one man's narcissism, and um, can you talk a little bit in those terms about what we're seeing here?
Well, I wish, of course, that I had had enough of my sea legs in that first debate to do so with greater clarity. Hatred is viral, and so is love. And the various aspects, greed, bigotry, anti-Semitism, anti-homophobia, um, racism. There are so many forms that these, in some ways, and in some cases, ancient attitudinal viruses. That's what they are. Uh,
Mm.
you look at something like anti-Semitism. This is an ancient attitudinal malignancy, and the same with homophobia, and same with racism, and these things, these kinds of they are what used to be called demons, by the way. And we, in our modern arrogance, think we have some more sophisticated way of recognizing these things. In fact, we are in many ways less sophisticated, because there was a time when it was understood they were called demonic forces. And there are other forces as well: love, compassion, mercy, tolerance, unity, service, dignity, decency, democracy. They are, when Abraham Lincoln called it the angels of our better nature. He wasn't called a new age whack job for saying that. That
Oh,
was understood at that time. They were called demonic forces, and they were called angelic forces. That's what ancient people would do. That's what people would have said hundreds of years ago. If you were to have said, if you described bigotry, racism, etc., people would have said, "Oh, you mean demons." If you had described kindness and sympathy and love, people have said, "Oh, you mean angels." So there has long been a recognition, before the arrogance and ultimate superficiality of the modern Western mind, that these are deeper forces. These are deeper forces going on. And do not kid yourself about how strong they are. And they cannot, and they must be literally exorcised. And they are exorcised by not only by thinking you can cast them out with a policy change here or a policy change there, making this or that illegal. They are exercised ultimately by a deeper commitment to the only true antidote, which is our commitment to love, our commitment to kindness. But what has happened in our society over the last few decades is, I don't think the problem is that the average American is not a dignified, decent, loving person, because I actually think the average American is. But what's happened over the last few decades is that we have completely disconnected the question of what is the right thing to do, what is integrity, what is honor, what is loyalty, and what is love, from the public sphere. And our public policies must be guided by conscience and integrity and loyalty and love, just as much as individual behavior. And so if you have huge gargantuan forces of societal power, economic power, technological power, governmental power placed at the service of that which is ultimately amoral, then it opens the door for the genuinely immoral forces to walk in.
mm. Mm. I do want to say that I thought you did a wonderful job in the debates, and I thought it was shocking. It was shocking in a positive way to hear talk about love and morality on a greater platform, really on a spiritual platform that you never hear on a debate stage. You hear people saying we're going to give money to this and we're going to stop war, but you never hear them saying we need a Department of Children. We need a Department of Peace. You just So I thought it was just fabulous. And I also was very disturbed that people kind of used the word spiritual guru to describe you as opposed to in the wholeness that you are. And I've said many times that I thought if it was, say, a Reverend Al Sharpton, or if it
Thank
was
you, Juliana. Thank you. Or any man, or any,
any man,
or
thank
if I
you.
was a traditional clergy. You were so right. You were so kind to me. And also what you were saying, these to me are some of the fractures within progressivism, that it's an old-fashioned, only externalized conversation. And one of the reasons the right has been able to expand its base the way it has is, whether you and I find it hypocritical sometimes or not, clearly we do, a
Or every time, whatever.
a recognition that there are forces beyond just what's going on the external level. We need a whole person politics. We need a politics, and progressive politics needs to open to this. It's stuck. We need a politics that speaks to the various dimensions of our humanity. Otherwise, it will not be reaching people at the deeper levels of their humanity, and then it won't turn into votes, and then it won't turn into political power, and then we're really in trouble.
I just was like, this is amazing. I was shocked they let you even say a word because
Well,
I feel,
after 2 times, somebody clearly said, "Get that woman off the stage."
yeah, right. Well, and here we are with the Joe
Yeah.
Biden. First of all, I do want to thank you for backing Bernie. I think it really means a lot. It meant a lot to me. It meant a lot to the people who, a lot of Act TV folks are Bernie folks. Most Act TV was founded out of Occupy Wall Street and that movement. So I do want to thank you for that. You're the only one, right? The only candidate who backed Bernie.
Yeah, uh, everybody can figure that out for what it is if hello.
Yeah. Oh boy. So people in our Twitch chat are slightly upset about the a little bit of your comments about how mental illness is based, solely on, not solely, you didn't say solely,
No.
on systematic forces. I'm a Do you have a thought about the people who are saying, well, sometimes it's a chemical imbalance?
Yeah, sometimes
So
it's a chemical imbalance, although, and I mean, there is such a thing as,
schizophrenia.
let me be very clear.
Yeah.
Do I think that painkillers should exist? Of course, I think painkillers should exist. However, we absolutely know attorneys general all over this country have indicted pharmaceutical executives for their now well-established predatory practices, by which a larger audience was created and clientele was created for painkillers than should have been. That's called the opioid crisis.
Mm.
Do I believe antidepressants should exist for people who need them? Absolutely, I do. However, I find it totally naive of us to not question. I think it's very healthy skepticism to recognize that the big pharmaceutical companies want to do, I mean, that's what a profit driven healthcare system is. So why should we assume that when it comes to painkillers, they are such known criminals? And when it came to antidepressants, they're as pure as the driven snow. My point is this: I see antidepressants the way I see painkillers. Do some people need them? Absolutely. And I honor that, and they should have them. However, in my work, and I've been up close and personal on this. This is not just theory for me. I've
Mhm.
been my job has been working with deeply upset, depressed people for the last 30 years. My point is that going through a divorce is painful. It is not a mental illness.
Mhm.
Grieving someone you love is painful. It is not a mental illness. Bankruptcy is painful. It is not a mental illness. One of the deep, dark, dirty little secrets here that only recently has come to light and people are not recognizing it for its import is the addictive nature of these things. I never said depression does not exist.
Mhm.
But there is a way in which the pharmaceuticological context for depression has taken the word. There is a lot of depression that is not chemical imbalance. And I must say, the vast majority, I would like to ask you and any of your people who wrote in, who know people who were put on antidepressants, really, well, did
Not
anyone
any better.
check their brain chemistry before
No.
they were prescribed that? Did somebody check their brain chemistry? I mean, this is just not the way it works in America. It's not like a bunch of blood tests are done for people's brain chemistry. And for that matter, meditation and prayer. I mean, there are many things that change people's brain chemistry, including food. So, is there such a thing as chemical imbalance and those people should have them? Absolutely. But is there also a serious, in my opinion, problem in America with our whole contextualization of the dark night of the soul? Yes. And by the way, when you do not have a realization that sadness, deep sadness, and yes, depression, not chemical. I'm not talking about the, if you people want to go into like chemical and all that. I'm just talking about people who are depressed. Not all depression is that.
Mhm.
And this is, here we are with a depressing episode. It is a genuinely, objectively depressing episode. And in a way, we need the musculature, the emotional and psychological musculature that will enable us to be fortified enough. Do you think that the women who were the women suffragettes, they were thrown in jail? Okay, the conditions within the jail were so terrible that they went on a hunger strike, and the response of the prison administration was to send these men into their cells and force these metal contraptions around their necks and force feed them. You think they weren't anxious? That's all I'm saying. Is
Mhm.
there's anxiety and depression and heartbreak that is unfortunately often part of life. And if we label all of that as our own mental health issue, then it can lead us away from dealing with larger societal issues. That's all I'm saying.
No, that's great. And we have other people in the chat saying any number of things here, but Rokotansky says non-chemical depression is driven by unfettered capitalism. I truly strongly believe this. And we've
Well,
talked
I
here.
think that that person is onto something. That's really my point. How could you? We have created a society because short term corporate profit has replaced the vast majority of humanitarian bottom lines. People, this is so unnatural for the soul. It is so, this is not the air we were meant to breathe. Not everybody can thrive within that. And what it takes to thrive within that is almost a cutting off of certain aspects of our deeper humanity. So that
Mhm.
person's point is every bit as I believe as relevant and as legitimate as anyone else's. And I think it's a conversation we do need to be having.
Yeah, and it's a loop because if you start feeling depressed, then your brain starts getting used to feeling depressed. There is such thing as neuroplasticity, and then something happens, and and so it becomes kind of a feeding loop, and then you have a chemical imbalance for that
And then people can't
time,
think
and
of
then they give
what's
you
wrong
the
with them.
medicine, and it's like a loop. And yeah, I really do believe that I agree with Rokotansky, and I also agree with whatever you can do to love yourself is important. And if you need a drug to stand on in that moment of pain, I'm with you, Marianne, in terms of saying there's a place, there's a place. We
Uh,
talked earlier about people. Oh, I'm sorry.
The
Did you want to?
legalization of marijuana is part of that conversation, by the way, and it should be.
Thank you. We talked earlier about how people are waking up, and I'm recognizing that having done, studied this for a while. When people wake up to something that they weren't aware of, there's also sort of this psychological explosion and falling off. And now we are waking up as a society. Hopefully, that's the hope. Um, what what words do you have for people who are maybe weren't aware so much of what's been happening and are now just becoming aware of how they've been preyed on, or how what they thought was happening in our politics, in our society, is not the case?
Well, we heal in life one aha at a time. And politics is kind of like a soap opera. So you're homesick, right? And you turn on television and you've got the remote in your hand and you turn it on and it's some plot you know nothing about the characters. And that's where you are pre-political awareness state. You don't know what the plot is, you don't know how the dots connect, you don't know who the characters are. It all seems kind of crazy to you. But then the next day you're still sick. And so you put on the remote and you start seeing it and you just got it on in the background. By the fourth or the fifth day, you find yourself saying, oh my God, she's having this baby because the plot, you get it. So
Mhm.
what happens is people have this intimidation, but the truth is, it's not as complicated as some people would have you think,
Mm.
right? And so when you said, like, for instance, you're doing this show, all of us are doing what we can. And I think when you were talking about doing this show, I think this is a big service. There are so many deeper conversations going on. People are at home. They can listen to shows like yours. They can listen if they go to my social media, mine, and there are hundreds of people like us, thousands of people like us conversations. It's like anything else in life. Just open your ears, open your eyes, start observing, start listening. You know, they say in AA, we're talking about shut up and listen.
Shut up and
And
listen.
it becomes clearer. It becomes clearer. So when you say, what about people who are just starting? All of us were just starting at some points,
Mhm.
but you pick up a book, you start reading something that maybe you had
Listen to Marianne's podcast or talks on the Tuesday night talks,
done.
which you probably can't do right now because you're stuck in
Yeah,
your
but
house.
I'm doing on my Instagram and stuff, I'm doing all kinds of conversations. Almost every other day, I'm putting out a video.
I know we've been watching them actually on the show in preparation for your appearance here.
Thank you. You're so great, Julianna. I have great respect and admiration for you.
I can't tell you what that means to me, Marianne. You made my I guess year. No, I mean your work has been very very helpful to me in times of stress and also as we start waking up politically. Um, a question coming in: if Bernie falls short of the nomination, will you, Marianne, support the Democratic candidates regardless?
Yes, I will. Yes, I will. I think that Donald Trump is an existential threat to our democracy. And for me personally, that must be denying him a second term is, to me, our patriotic duty to do everything we can.
Mhm.
After that, the progressives in America a lot to think about. And listen, I spent a year in the belly of that beast. So no one knows better than I do the corruption of that establishment. I
Oh,
get
I would like to hear about that. Can we? Do you feel comfortable talking about that?
the reason, the extent to which I don't is simply for the reason that we're already discussing.
Mhm.
I don't
Right.
want anything I say to be used in anyone's minds as an excuse to not vote for the Democrat.
Mhm.
After the election, we'll talk
Right.
because after the election, there will be much to talk about.
Well, what I've been saying here, and what I continue to encourage people to think about is the idea that people don't get off heroin like they don't stop. They go to methadone clinic, and then there's like a step down. And so, if we could get rid of Trump uh,
Yeah.
and have Biden, and then I don't think Biden's going to be able to ignore the upswelling of progressive populism that Bernie Sanders has started and that you are encouraging as well, and AOC and other people like that. Um, I don't think he's going to be able to ignore half of the party that the Democratic Party is now, more progressive than it's been in decades. So I think we just go for the best thing at the time and then just keep on pushing. I think if we wait for the perfect candidate, we're going to be in trouble.
The institutional resistance there, and once again, I speak from experience, the institutional resistance to letting anyone into the room who doesn't fit in with their prevailing worldview is thicker than most people realize. And as I know, they will use even character assassination to get someone off the stage if they don't like them. However, so I don't think it's reasonable to assume that, quote unquote, they're not going to be able to avoid us. However, if we are prepared to completely rid ourselves of any illusion that they uh, will open the door nicely, and
Mhm.
we are willing to be active in ways, for instance, what they do on the presidential level, they do on the congressional level, they do on the senatorial level. That's why we have to be more involved in the primaries of congressional candidates, progressive congressional candidates. When you have um, only the corporatist Democrats who are able to make it to the Democratic nomination, not just for president, but for Congress, for Senate. These are the contests that we're going to have to become very involved in. Don't think that they're going to look at it like, well, we can't avoid them anymore. I think they're going to be whatever. Like I said, we'll talk about this once it's over. Right now, I think it's so important for me personally. Yeah, we have to vote blue for exactly the reason that you said.
So you've already answered the one question, but I did want to give a nod to Lauren had asked a question in our chat. Should we abandon electoral politics in favor of peaceful resistance if political corruption continues to sabotage the honesty and openness of US democratic institutions?
No, we can't. That's exactly what they'd love you to do. That would make their day. That makes them just open up the champagne bottles. That's called, to them, that's their success. Oh, they love that. They love that. Well, that silenced you. No, no,
Mhm.
no. Absolutely not. No, you cannot have a serious conversation about political economic transformation in this country without including electoral politics. It's just not possible. There's a limit to what you can do from the sidelines. There's a limit to what you can do from the outside. The consciousness of the American people, this is not just about progressives, by the way. The consciousness of the American people in total is not the problem. You can look at issue after issue, and the American people are a little bit left of center. So that's not the problem. The problem is that our democracy is not working, and the will of the people has been superseded by the will expressed by corporate money, and that our government has been hijacked and is a handmaiden to the forces making short-term corporate profit. The bottom line, we have, as every progressive knows, a corporate aristocracy of health insurance companies and big pharmaceutical companies. By the way, given our conversation before, it's unbelievable to me how progressives fall in line. Big pharma, big pharma, big pharma. You can't make even the most nuanced question about anything. And like, can we stop being duped? We have our own blind spots here.
Mhm.
So whether it's gun manufacturers, food, big ag, defense contractors,
I
we
hear what you're saying,
repudiated.
Marianne.
Pardon?
I hear what you're saying.
Yeah, of course you do. And so we repudiated that nonsense in 1776, and we're going to have to repudiate it again,
Mhm.
nonviolently, peacefully. But John Kennedy said that those who make peaceful revolution impossible make violent revolution inevitable. We absolutely must create a valve for the legitimate rage. And that to me is what 2016 was. The only two people who named that legitimate rage, who affirmed that for people, you're right, you are being screwed, you're right, the system is rigged, the only people who named it were Bernie and Trump. So for me, it seemed so clear that that rage was going to be expressing itself. It was not going to feel expressed by someone who wouldn't even name the pain. The
Mhm.
only two choices were a progressive populism or an authoritarian populism, and we know what the DNC did to Bernie.
Apparently, we want to learn the hard way with the authoritarian that we have, and now the pandemic that we have, and all the things that are falling falling out from there. I tend to be also, maybe I'm insane, but I tend to be seeing some positives coming from this already, including things like because of the lack of air travel right now, that the skies are clearing up and the lack of, pollution is down. And although Donald Trump is trying to destroy everything by
As we
rolling back
speak.
environmental stuff, but, to be able to, I feel like you have to be able to see what's possible before you can make it happen. And I think that some of this being able to see that life can actually still be good without constantly going to the movies and constantly going out and the hum of busyness. Being able to see that our skies can be cleared up, and that the cruise ship industry is an absolute must, like, that we can make better choices. I just feel like, there's an opportunity here, to be able to see things that we want. And yeah, I
Well,
feel like they got you off the stage. You were talking about departments of peace and a Department of Children, and people were like, "No, we don't want to see. We can't hear about what's possible.
yeah,
We must shut that."
you're talking about a couple of really important things, and I'd like to speak to that because I really appreciate what you just said. First of all, we're an adrenaline-driven society, addictively so. We're always running around, and Blaise Pascal, the French philosopher, said that every problem in the world stems from man's inability to sit quietly in a room alone.
Mhm.
So the fact that we can't run around like we normally do, from a psychological and emotional perspective, a lot of the running around that we do in our society is an avoidance
Mhm.
of the feelings that come up in response to the fact that there's so much running around. And yet, that's part of the jonesing that's going on. When you were talking about an addict in rehab, we're so addicted to that outer life and we crash into a wall. And that's what a lot of people are experiencing now. The other thing you just brought up when I talked about a Department of Peace and when I talked about children and youth, I was saying on my campaign what is exactly true now, which is we are skating on very thin ice. Because even though this is a pandemic, it could just as easily have been a nuclear disaster. It could just as easily have been a weather catastrophe. And what this is revealing is how ill prepared we are because our system is not currently set up to, in any way, care for the common good under normal circumstances, and sure as hell not set up to protect the common good should we hit some rough waters.
Mhm. Mhm.
So the reason I was talking about a Department of Peace is because we are way too close to the edge
Mhm.
when it comes to the kinds of nuclear and other kinds of disasters along that line that could happen. The reason I'm talking about children and youth is because we're skating way too thin ice, walking way too close to the edge when it comes to millions of chronically traumatized children and where they will be in 10 or 15 or 20 years. So hopefully, this will make a lot of people far more sophisticated in their recognition that politically, just like personally, you can't just live for short-term satisfaction on any level in the moment. You have to live your life on a more grounded, meaningful foundation that includes a realization that you have to uh, be ready for whatever might come. And you have to proactively create the good things, not just react to the bad things. Because if all you do is react to the bad things, but without being as concerned proactively with cultivating the good things, then some of those bad things will overwhelm you. And that's what's happening right now.
Marianne, from our Twitch stream question from $27, will you run again?
My heart, it was I don't think anybody runs for president who doesn't feel a deep calling. It's too grueling an experience to take on. I felt a deep calling to do that. I don't know if I would ever feel that again or not. If I do, I will. If I don't, I won't. I certainly have an experience of how brutal it is, but I also have an experience of how exhilarating it is. And the run did not leave me, it left me, I realized the system is even more corrupt than I knew, but people are even more wonderful and more intelligent than I knew, the average voter. And so it has actually increased, even deepened my faith in democracy if we really practice it. What we
Mm.
have to do is dissolve institutional systems that do more to dictate and manipulate democracy than to facilitate it. So I'm like you, Juliana. I'm like everybody listening. I think all of us at this time feel like, what can I do to help? And when this is over, we'll all be in that place. So if I feel running is of value, then I will, I guess. Right now,
I
I
like that. How would you just Yeah. You need to feel called at the moment.
That's right, especially for something as fundamental as that. You don't want
Marianne,
to get in the way of something. That's definitely a situation where you don't do that unless you feel that it serves for you to do that.
mhm. Marianne, I want to thank you both for our audience who is thanking you. And I want to thank you personally, because as I've said, your work has impacted me deeply. And I want to thank you, for our whole society. I hope that you know the service that you did, even just being on that stage. Um, and if you don't, I'll write it up and send it to you in an email.
Well, I want to thank you too, Juliana, because at a time when I was barraged by what I felt were very, very unfair and clearly strategized media attacks, I remember, you were kind, you were respectful, you gave me a fair shot, and I'll never forget that. Thank you
I
so much.
sent money. Oh, Marianne Williamson, we put all of your social media on our Twitch page, and we do really appreciate you
Thank
taking
you.
time to talk to our audience. We hope you'll join us again, and
Love
good luck in
Thank
everything.
you.
We'll be
Thank you.
following.
Thank you so much. God bless you.
Bless you too.
Bye.